This paper discusses a case study, an interactive stage set designed by a group of postgraduate students for the Literacy Pirates charity. It examines the role of real-life community-oriented design projects developed as part of the curriculum in the context of the UK higher education's controversial neoliberal direction. Academia is constantly changing and is considered to be in a transitional state of crisis, according to many, in the UK and beyond. Its identity and purpose are being renegotiated. The role to be both speculative and pragmatic is challenged at times by various constraints. With the introduction and increase of fees, as well as the subsequent shift in the perception of academia, studies are being commodified. Several conversations have been raised on this topic, some of which idealize the former state of academia and demonize any change, whereas others support the current paradigm as the only way forward. Mayer and Eccles, in their article Reclaiming Our Universities, raise their concerns towards the government's plans to prioritize the higher education further and align education with the private sector. As they claim, new for-profit funded universities are emerging, which position themselves as meeting industry and student expectations rather than centers for the creation, dissemination, and research of knowledge. Carter et al. In the recent paper present a different aspect of the relationship between academia and private sector. They argue that data show that more research is produced by the private sector than by academia, and they describe this as a threat. Their argument is that private sector may be driven by biases or specific agendas that make the research less objective and impartial in comparison to that of academia. They refer to the academic ideal of the Enlightenment, arguing that if the trends analyzed will be confirmed, the pessimistic vision of the dialectic of enlightenment may become a reality. Science that was supposed to sustain human emancipation and freedom risks today to be at the service without any control of the interests of single companies. In this situation, the space for a free, independent debate among researchers aimed to foster an equitable, sustainable world risks to become increasingly limited. However, these concerns, although potentially alarming, assume that academia is or could be something static. Academia changes and transforms from the paradigm set in the Enlightenment. The question should be how and towards what direction, rather than merely resisting the change. Samuel Friel, in a recent article of his, discusses an aspect of academia's crisis, pointing to an interesting controversy. He argues that academia needs to acknowledge its nature and the extent of its power, or lack thereof, and he believes that academia's identity crisis is partly due to this misconception. As he claims, it is not that academic research has no influence on society, nor that it is never a force for good. It is more that the strength and nature of academic power is very different from what researchers say they believe. This is the essence of the identity crisis, a feverish moral urgency to use academia for good and an unwillingness to be honest about the realities of academic power. He believes that the dual role of academia, to understand and analyze on one hand, and to act to offer applicable solutions to real problems on the other, need to be distinct and acknowledged as such. He points out that aligning academia's moral ambition with activism leads to a fantasy and an identity crisis. As he claims, the key is allowing ourselves to differentiate between the areas of academia that bear immediate, real-world consequences and those that are analytical and intellectual. A culture of activism is essential to the thriving of the first category and corrosive to the mission of the second. Reflecting on the earlier discussed context, Friel's arguments assume that academia, whether analytical or practical, is aiming at creating and promoting knowledge in the direction that seems ethical and meaningful, and the external factors and industries within the above arguments seem to be the outside forces that may support or compromise this. Donskis, in his fairly polemic and at times poetic tone, presents the past few centuries, from the Renaissance onwards, as the time of utopias, and our times as the time of dystopias, associating utopia with a collective vision and dystopia with individualization and privatization. Although not explicitly saying so, he presents through his arguments the contradictions within the very nature of academia throughout time. As he argues, The human sciences, Studia Humanitatis, as those were developed in Renaissance, grew outside the universities of the time. The medieval universities, which organized and separated disciplines and knowledge, would have not enabled an environment for the Studia Humanitatis to grow. Through this thorough overview of academia throughout time, one can read various issues and conflicts appearing in several moments in time. Knowledge, innovation, and humanities and the arts, in many instances, did not start in the universities. Our patrons funding art masterpieces, independent institutions leading scientific breakthroughs, to name a few. Besides, as Foucault argued, universities and other such institutions reproduce the status quo and normalize knowledge and behavior. In other words, they impose and reproduce an idealized convention. We need to acknowledge these broader conversations on the role of academia because in the context of the recent critical debate, we sometimes tend to idealize a simplified and generalized version of the past and juxtapose it to the current conditions. Within the above broad and complex context of debates on the future of academia, the position of our academic design studio is expressed through the specific design questions, briefs, projects, and collaborations we develop. We hope that without idealizing a simplified version of the past and without blindly falling into the neoliberal, industry-driven paradigm, we instill in an open and discursive way a critical ethos to our students. We remain open to interaction and collaboration with the real world in ways that are both disruptive and productive. Recent projects of ours include the Shed Life project, a community workshop and meeting place in Barking where locals of different generations can meet and exchange skills. This project aimed at addressing the issue of exclusion and isolation within a specific suburban community and particularly felt by a group of Englishmen of different generations. It was developed through a collaboration between our master studio, led by the author, together with the Thames Youth Tenants Association, humorist director Susie Miller-Oduniyi, and the UEL MARC, led by Alan Chandler. The Shed Life project addressed issues concerning English residents, whereas our previous project, the Soup International Mobile Kitchen, developed in collaboration with colleague Claudia Palma and the Southwark Asylum Seekers Day Centre, focused on the issue of food and cooking as a metaphor for communication, care, and exchange. Conversations revealed that the refugees would feel a lot more at home if they had facilities to cook for their families and fellow travelers, and hence our students designed compact mobile kitchens, drawing ideas from the cultural backgrounds of the specific ethnic groups. The above examples demonstrate the broader ethos of our studio, within which the specific case study, presented in more detail here, is situated. The Storm project was a stage set design created by the UEL MA Interior Design students for the Literacy Pirates. The students of our course worked on this real-life community-engaging project, designed the stage set collectively, and then built it in the University of East London workshops. The Literacy Pirates initiative is an after-school learning program and aims at helping children develop their imagination, reading and writing skills. They welcome children referred by local schools and offer them an engaging experience that enhances not only their reading and writing skills, but also their imagination, confidence, and participation. The Literacy Pirates charity has helped hundreds of children, and their inspiring work is broadly known in London and beyond. They deliver a range of different workshops, performances, and storytelling activities. One of the typical patterns of their educational workshops starts with a performative storytelling. The storyteller narrates a story, and the children are invited to participate, contributing to the story. Then, when the narration ends, the children are invited to imagine the continuation of the story, and then write it with the help of educators, volunteers, and read it to the rest of the group. The aim of our project was to transform a conventional teaching room into a magical environment for children to take part in an immersive and interactive performative storytelling workshop. The Literacy Pirates performances normally take place in their building in Hackney. However, in this instance, they had a series of performances scheduled to take place in Stratford in one of the buildings of the UEL campus, and we were invited to design the stage set for them. Our aim was to challenge and exceed the brief that we were given and create an interactive environment that would redefine the performances and would place the children in the center of the action. Sounds, visuals, moving components were introduced to create this magical environment. The children were not considered as simple members of the audience, but as active actors. In the beginning of the project, the design group, our UEL students, visited the Literacy Pirates venue and had the opportunity to discuss with the director, Jude Williams, her colleagues and the organization's volunteers, and find out more about the Literacy Pirates' history, mission and collaborations with local schools. The Literacy Pirates director showed us the various spaces of their building and discussed with us some of the main themes of the stories they use in their educational events. The design group observed closely the interior spaces of the Literacy Pirates building and the visual metaphors that were being regularly used for their stories. Big waves, a mermaid and sea creatures were prominent, as many of the stories involved sea adventures. The UEL students also attended in person a creative and playful learning session with the children and volunteers, and the Literacy Pirates educators. This allowed the UEL students to gain a deeper understanding of how the young children respond to the different elements of the storytelling, what excites their imagination, and what makes them participate more actively. It also allowed our students to observe closely what makes the children gradually open up and become more confident in writing, reading, imagining a story, and sharing it with a group. Working collaboratively on a design project can be a challenge for a group of students, as they might struggle to fully self-organize effectively. The method we followed was to structure the whole process into very specific stages, some being individual work and some being group work. The first few design exercises were done by the students individually. Each student, with the tutor's guidance, analyzed and interpreted the brief and identified some key concepts that they intended to explore. These included how the notion of the sea can be abstractly communicated through spatial design, how the bodily movement and participation can potentially make the audience more engaged, how lighting and moving image can enhance the performance experience without distracting from the immersive storytelling. The overarching conversation was on how design can trigger children's imagination, enable them to express their curiosity, enhance their confidence, and subsequently encourage them to participate even more actively in the playful learning process. Within the above context, each student chose a work of art which was for them associated to the concept or question they were examining, and they translated that into a three-dimensional sculptural object, which in turn was transcribed into a three-dimensional abstract model. This was what generated the main design idea for the students' initial individual proposals for the stage set. The individual proposals were reviewed in the form of a crit with representatives from the Literacy Pirates, as well as from the UEL Civic Engagement and Volunteering team. The strengths of each proposal were discussed by the whole group, and the shortlisted ones formed the basis for the next step, the design of one collective stage set. This stage was supported by the tutors and led to an agreed layout. This new collective design proposal was broken down into small components that had to be designed in further detail, each by a subgroup of 3 students. The last stage involved the physical making of a number of real-scale prototypes, as well as the making of the final stage set, which was then transported, installed, and tested at the venue. As seen on the photos, the stage set involved steel and wooden frames. which held panels and sticks with fabrics and fabric ribbons attached to them. Long pieces of fabric with timber frames and cut holes allowed the audience to wear them and move them, forming waves and folds. The children put them on and started jumping up and down. The longer pieces of fabric were attached onto timber frames, which in turn were hooked onto the bigger steel and wooden frames. This worked both as a backdrop to the performance as well as moving waves when unhooked and moved by the performers. The stage set was organized into layers of frame fabrics, some static, some moving by the performers, and some moving by the audience. The division between performer and audience was blurred, with the audience becoming the actors. The students created also a stop frame animation, which was projected onto the stage set throughout the performance, giving it a dreamy blue atmosphere. The audience sat on cushions made out of canvas and recycled paper filling, which made a sound as one moved, enhancing the ambient sound of waves and sea creatures. A wooden frame held a large paper roll with a welded steel handle to roll it and unroll it. The large-scale paper was designed to be unrolled towards the end of the performance in the area where the children audience sat, and while the sea sounds and blue abstract projections were still playing, the children were invited to draw the sea creatures the story was talking about, and a little later start writing about them. Through this project, our team studied thoroughly how the design of a space can make the user feel part of a story and be inspired to participate. The interactive, playful elements were designed successfully, and the young audience intuitively used them straight away. The stage set transformed the audience into performers and made them even more engaged with the already successful educational performative workshops of the Literacy Pirates. The design students, alongside a series of technical and conceptual issues, discussed also extensively the role of real-life collaborations, as well as the role of design in our everyday living. They discussed the potential of design to convey ideas and shape behaviors. If the design changes the way in which a performance spectator moves in space, collaborates with the person sitting next to them, feel more inspired and engaged in a collective cause. What could the equivalent be for any other type of spatial design project? What kind of behaviors, ideas, interactions could it inspire, enable, stop, or transform? With a small-scale project as a starting point, the students started discussing the social and political role of design in many different levels and directions. From the role of architectural design in shaping behaviors and connections, to the role of meaningful real-life projects as part of the academic curriculum. The students worked on a real-life project with a strict deadline, with regular conversations with real clients, and had to build it within the limited budget that was given to them. They had to understand in depth the needs of the client and create a solution that exceeded the client's expectations. In addition to that, the students took initiative to stretch and reinterpret the client's brief in a way that they considered even more meaningful and valuable. The stage set, rather than being a simple backdrop, repositioned literally and metaphorically the audience. The values and ideas they discussed throughout the process were not within the discourse of pleasing the industry and becoming more employable, but rather on the broader role of design in shaping spaces and lives. Thank you.